The afternoon was unremarkable at first as the sun dipped low and the air hung heavy with the promise of warmth. On a quiet stretch of Illinois highway, two patrol cars waited in the shadows of pine trees, their engines idling like patient predators. A lone driver emerged, a black woman in her mid-30s, dressed simply in a well-worn gray sweatshirt and a pair of comfortable jeans. For 3 days, she had been off duty from her work as the director of the Drug Enforcement Administration, relishing the chance to bake homemade peach pie with her niece and enjoy family laughter. In that moment, though, her DEA title was tucked far from sight. Her silver sedan drifted a fraction under the 45 mph speed limit as she rounded a gentle curve. Without warning, a patrol car's lights flashed behind her. No siren, only a silent command. She took a deep breath, signaled, and guided her car onto a gravel shoulder. Her heartbeat quickened, not out of panic, but from a cautious instinct that something was amiss. She set her hands flat upon the wheel, trying to steady herself while the senior officer approached with measured steps. His partner, a younger man named Trent, lingered near the trunk, his posture rigid and expectant. When the senior officer tapped her window, she lowered it just enough to allow him to speak. "License and registration," he said, his voice clipped yet polite. She removed her documents from the glove compartment in deliberate practice motions, her hands steady, her expression respectful. The officer examined her license for a moment longer than necessary, his gaze flicking over her name before he raised an eyebrow and exchanged a slight nod with Trent. Without comment, the senior officer leaned closer. "Open the trunk," he ordered, as if citing a routine request. She glanced at him, then at Trent, and asked quietly, "May I see the legal basis for this search?" The officer replied that she had been swerving out of her lane, though she knew she had driven with care. A hush settled over the roadside as the two officers waited for her next move. Calmly, she acknowledged the supposed violation and braced herself, mindful of her rights, yet determined to comply with proper procedure. Standing just beyond her open door, she felt the afternoon heat press against her skin. In that tense, silent moment, Tiffany Coleman prepared for the confrontation ahead, her mind alert, her resolve unwavering. Under the calm surface, Tiffany Coleman kept her composure when the order came to pop the trunk. With a steady hand, she pressed the release button. Within seconds, Officer Trent moved behind her car and reappeared holding a clear plastic bag filled with a white powder. He flashed a smug grin as if he'd caught a major criminal. Tiffany's voice was measured as she stated, "That bag was not in my vehicle." Trent dismissed her denials with a mock laugh and reminded her that a badge always trumped protest. Without raising her voice, she invoked her rights. "I do not consent to this search, and I demand to speak with a supervisor." Trent's disdain deepened. "Look at her playing the law professor card," he sneered, thinking she can outsmart us. Tiffany met his gaze calmly. "Your actions are misconduct. You'll need to involve your supervisor," she replied. Trent stepped forward, anger flickering in his eyes. "You keep refusing, we'll add obstruction charges," he warned. Tiffany remained resolute, standing her ground and refusing to exit her car until a supervisor arrived. In response, Trent grabbed the door and yanked her out with more force than necessary. The senior officer and Trent coordinated, snapping handcuffs on her wrists despite her continued protests. They never read her Miranda rights or explained any charges. Tiffany was forced face first onto the pavement, her sweatshirt scraping against the rough asphalt. Onlookers slowed their cars, believing they were witnessing a routine arrest. No one recognized her as the director of the DEA. To them, it seemed like any other stop gone wrong. Yet in that moment, a grave injustice was unfolding, an abuse of power hidden behind the veneer of authority. At the precinct's booking desk, Tiffany Coleman was led inside under strict control, each step echoing down the linoleum hallway. The air smelled of stale coffee and a strong cleaner used on the floors, a scent she would soon associate with injustice. The desk sergeant looked up long enough to jot down the charges: possession and obstruction on a worn clipboard. He didn't offer a glance at Tiffany, simply scrawling the information as if processing any other arrestee. When he entered her name into the computer system, everything changed in an instant. The screen flickered and displayed her official photograph: Coleman Tiffany, Director, Drug Enforcement Administration, classified access level 5. Immediate federal contact required. The sergeant's pen shot up in midair, his face paling. Stuttering, he reached for a secure line to call for backup. Tiffany watched calmly as he fumbled, then took a deep breath and shifted into action. Despite the cuffs still on her wrists, she spoke with quiet authority. "Lock down this station. Seal all surveillance footage. block any further access. Her words carried weight and confusion rippled through the few officers at hand. Within the hour, federal agents arrived, their badges glinting in the harsh overhead lights. They moved with purpose, securing evidence and cordoning off areas of the station. In their hands, the bag of white powder bore a DEA tracking code, a code that linked it back to a secure federal warehouse. It never should have been outside those walls. As federal personnel swept through every desk and storage room, it became painfully clear that Tiffany had been deliberately set up. The corrupt officers who planted the evidence had vanished, but they could not hide the digital trail. By midday, the precinct was under a full internal probe led by federal agents determined to uncover the truth. In less than 60 minutes, the facade of a routine traffic stop crumbled, revealing a calculated attempt to frame the highest-ranking law enforcement official on the road that morning. Inside the small booking area, she is led under strict guard. The smell of stale coffee and floor cleaner hangs in the air, as though the station itself senses trouble. A desk sergeant barely glances at the charges: possession and obstruction, and jots them down on a worn clipboard. Only when he types her name into the computer does his demeanor shift. On the screen appears her photograph and title: Coleman Tiffany, Director, Drug Enforcement Administration, Classified Access Level 5, immediate federal contact required. The sergeant's hand trembles as he fumbles for a secure phone line. Despite the cuffs still on her wrist, she commands the room: lock down this station, seal the surveillance footage, block all access. Officers scramble in confusion, and within the hour, federal agents arrive to secure evidence. Their eyes fall on the plastic bag which bears a DEA tracking code, proving it came from a secure federal warehouse. It should never have been outside those walls. In less than 60 minutes, the precinct is swept into a full internal investigation, exposing the deliberate attempt to frame her. Once the DEA team arrives, they move swiftly to secure every inch of the precinct. Agents confirm that the plastic bag of white powder carries a federal tracking code tied to a classified drug seizure. In other words, evidence was stolen from a secure DEA facility and deliberately planted in the trunk of her car. That discovery sends shockwaves through the station. Agents continue digging, pulling departmental records and body cam footage. What they uncover is horrifying. Officers Garrett and Bishop have a history of planting drugs on minority drivers. One case stands out most of all: Ricardo Flores, a 22-year-old Latino man who was arrested by the same pair months earlier. The official report declared it a suicide in custody, but a hidden bystander video now surfaces showing Garrett and Bishop using excessive force while placing drugs on his car. Anger erupts at DEA headquarters when agents reclassify Flores's death as suspicious rather than suicide. Tiffany Coleman, still reeling from her own ordeal, demands a full re-examination of every in-custody death linked to these two officers. As the investigation widens, agents unearth a deeply buried internal protocol called Sinno. This ghost system allowed corrupt officers to manipulate or erase records at will. Names, incident reports, and body cam footage were altered or wiped clean, ensuring complaints never saw daylight. Suddenly, a rotten system of cover-ups, intimidation, and blatant racism is exposed for all to see. Within days, the story goes public. Community leaders, civil rights organizations, and families of other victims rally around Flores's memory, demanding justice. The state attorney general announces a special task force to review every case tied to Sinno. Federal prosecutors pledge to indict everyone involved, Garrett, Bishop, and any higher-ups who protected them. And while one precinct's corruption is being dismantled, the question hangs in the air: how many other ghost systems lie hidden in departments across the country? The uncovering of Sinno is only the beginning, a stark reminder that power unchecked can never truly protect the innocent. Tiffany's discovery of Sinno reveals a deliberate clandestine network operating within multiple law enforcement agencies. As she unravels the protocol, it becomes clear that Sinno was designed to mask the illicit activities of officers Garrett and Bishop. Files show that seized narcotics mysteriously vanished from secure evidence lockers, reappearing later in criminal syndicates' hands. Complaints against the two officers, often filed by minority drivers, were quietly buried in digital archives rendered invisible. Determined to expose the truth, Tiffany orders every related file reopened. Phone records, autopsy reports, and in-car microphone audio are demanded immediately. She assembles a federal task force comprised of DEA, FBI, and Justice Department agents, each instructed to follow the pipeline of stolen contraband from southeastern warehouses to the black market. Working around the clock, the task force methodically dismantles Sinno's digital shields, recovering redacted documents and deleted video footage. A disturbing pattern emerges. Garrett and Bishop serve as foot soldiers in a deeper conspiracy facilitating the flow of narcotics that line corrupt pockets at every level. As Tiffany reviews case after case, some resulting in wrongful arrests and even deaths in custody, she realizes how far the corruption reaches. With every revelation, prosecutors reopen past indictments, demanding new autopsies and witness interviews. Tiffany prepares for the inevitable showdown, knowing that confronting these officers will set a precedent for rooting out systemic abuse. But she also understands that dismantling Sinno is only the beginning. The real work lies in rebuilding trust between law enforcement and the communities they betrayed. As the task force closes in on Garrett and Bishop, the air is thick with anticipation. Justice has a new champion, and the battle for accountability will redefine policing in the region. Digital breadcrumbs trace the corrupt officers to a remote compound deep in the Texas desert. Under a pre-dawn sky, Tiffany Coleman and her task force approached in silence, headlights cutting through the darkness. The air was still save for the distant hum of generators and the faint growl of an approaching convoy. Tiffany's heart pounded, not from fear, but from focused determination. Years of DEA training guided her as agents fanned out, securing perimeter points and disabling communication arrays. When the front gate swung open, Garrett and Bishop stood in the dim glow of security lights, their faces reflecting shock and disbelief. They shuffled from the shadows, hands raised as agents ordered them to drop their weapons. No shots were fired. Their arrogance evaporated into panic when federal officers snapped handcuffs around their wrists and recited Miranda warnings. As they were escorted to awaiting transport, Tiffany offered no gloat, only a silent acknowledgement that justice was closing in. Yet the true mastermind lay deeper in the shadows. Through meticulous digital forensics, agents uncovered evidence of a digital bunker in Houston, a converted warehouse lined with server racks and stacks of forged passports. Former agent Julian Pierce, once presumed dead after a staged accident, was at the helm. Shortly after sunrise, Tiffany's team coordinated with local SWAT to breach the bunker's reinforced doors. Inside, Pierce sat calmly among blinking routers and tangled cables as though expecting them. There was no resistance. He raised his hands in quiet resignation. The capture of Pierce sent shockwaves across law enforcement and criminal networks alike. His cool composure masked the depth of deception he had engineered. Sinno had been his brainchild, a digital smokescreen to protect crooked officers and funnel seized narcotics into the black market. As agents led him away in handcuffs, Tiffany stepped into the bunker's fluorescent light, surveying the seized servers and troves of falsified documents. This was more than a bust. It was the unraveling of a conspiracy that spanned states and agencies. With Garrett, Bishop, and now Pierce behind bars, Tiffany knew the next phase, testimony trials and rebuilding trust, would be just as crucial as the raid itself. With Julian Pierce now in federal custody, Tiffany Coleman and her team immediately secured a trove of digital records, seizing servers and encrypted files that revealed the full scope of Garrett and Bishop's criminal enterprise. These documents exposed hidden relationships between corrupt officers and organized crime networks, showing how seized narcotics vanished into black market channels. Armed with this evidence, Tiffany took her place before a packed congressional hearing, where the hushed silence gave way to stunned reactions as she calmly walked legislators through Sinno's inner workings. She explained how this clandestine protocol allowed crooked officers to alter arrest records, erase civilian complaints, and funnel illicit profits across state lines. Pierce sat stoically behind the witness table, his once confident posture replaced by a subdued acceptance of the truth laid bare. As Tiffany's testimony progressed, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle exchanged grim looks and whispered among themselves. She detailed the corruption's human costs, the reclassification of in-custody deaths like Ricardo Flores' case that were misreported as suicides, the mothers who never received justice for sons lost under questionable circumstances, and the families left to navigate a system rigged against them. When she finished, fiery outrage rippled through the chamber. Within days, mass indictments were unsealed, not only charging Garrett and Bishop with conspiracy and evidence tampering, but also naming former supervisors who had buried complaints, local prosecutors who turned a blind eye, and IT specialists who maintained Sinno's digital footprint. Simultaneously, the FBI announced a parallel investigation into every police department linked to the scheme. As news of these developments spread, several police chiefs quietly submitted resignations, and jurisdictions across multiple states restructured their internal affairs divisions. At each press briefing, Tiffany echoed the same message: no more ghost files, no more hidden agendas. The people deserve a system that protects, not praise. Her insistence on transparency laid the groundwork for long overdue reforms, teaching a powerful lesson: rooting out corruption requires relentless vigilance, accountability at every level, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. In the weeks following Julian Pierce's unmasking, DEA agents and federal prosecutors moved swiftly to secure all remaining drug evidence tied to the Sinno protocol and to re-examine past convictions that depended on compromised cases. Teams of attorneys and investigators pored over hundreds of files, uncovering dozens of wrongful convictions that were promptly overturned. Families who had long suffered in silence, for instance, the parents of Ricardo Flores finally received answers about the circumstances of their loved ones' deaths. At the same time, the Department of Justice announced a nationwide audit of evidence handling protocols, mandating tighter chain of custody rules and stricter oversight at every level. Recognizing that systemic change must include informed citizens, Tiffany Coleman partnered with community leaders to launch Know Your Rights workshops. Held in local churches, senior centers, and civic halls, these sessions focused on what to expect during traffic stops, how to document interactions, and the role of civilian oversight in holding law enforcement accountable. Local journalists produced in-depth documentaries about the Sinno scandal, giving viewers a clear look at how evidence had been manipulated and how the ripple effects touched every neighborhood. Television stations aired these reports during evening news, encouraging conversations at kitchen tables and barbershops alike about police reform and individual rights. Meanwhile, Pierce's federal trial began under the somber arches of a packed courtroom. He faced charges of racketeering, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and RICO violations, a legal onslaught built on digital evidence that Pierce himself had once believed hidden forever. As he sat at counsel's table, the man who had faked his own death and orchestrated Sinno watched helplessly as prosecutors laid out the full scope of his crimes. Even his once loyal supporters could no longer deny the necessity of dismantling the network he created. By the time closing arguments were made, it was clear that Pierce's legacy would stand as a cautionary tale, a vivid reminder that corruption can take root in the most unexpected places, but that vigilance, transparency, and the collective will of a community can uproot it for good. 18 months after the Sinno scandal broke, sweeping reforms reshaped law enforcement across the region. New state legislation mandated that every police department equip officers with body cameras and activate them during all stops. Civilian oversight boards composed of local residents were granted subpoena power to investigate complaints independently. Federal grants funded the construction of secure evidence warehouses and the deployment of tamper-proof digital tracking systems, effectively eliminating any possibility of ghost protocols. Community groups launched justice circles where formerly incarcerated individuals shared firsthand experiences, fostering empathy and rebuilding trust between police and civilians. In the federal courtroom, the sentencing of Julian Pierce drew national attention. The judge condemned Pierce's actions as having undermined the very foundation of public trust and imposed a 35-year prison term. Outside the courtroom, Tiffany's leadership continued to ripple outward. She was promoted to deputy administrator of the DEA, charged with creating a nationwide anti-corruption task force. Her days shifted from covert field work to public speaking and policymaking, yet her commitment remained unchanged. In every speech and meeting, she reminded audiences that lasting justice requires transparency, accountability, and the bravery to confront corruption wherever it hides. Today, remnants of the Sinno protocol have finally been erased, replaced by Flores, a transparent evidence tracking system named to honor a young man whose life was lost to corruption. This new framework is adopted nationwide, ensuring every piece of evidence, from seized narcotics to weapons, can be traced seamlessly from the moment it is collected to its appearance in court. Police departments host training sessions where veteran officers demonstrate Flores's digital interface, showing how to upload chain of custody details in real time. Courtrooms display screens with secure QR codes that allow jurors and attorneys to verify evidence integrity before making decisions. Tiffany often visits the family of John Flores, attending community events to acknowledge their bravery in speaking out. Former officers charged in the scandal serve as living reminders of what happens when power goes unchecked. Across the state, towns once divided by distrust now hold annual justice and community fairs, where officers and residents share meals, discuss policy, and celebrate progress. In federal agencies, Tiffany mentors new recruits, emphasizing that integrity isn't optional. She lectures at academies, telling cadets that transparency must be at the heart of every action. Though the Sinno network has been dismantled, she reminds audiences that vigilance is ongoing. New threats to justice can arise without warning, and hope endures. From this story, we learn that any power structure can be exploited to imprison justice, yet the courage and unwavering pursuit of that justice by a single individual can awaken the conscience of an entire community. The message is that no matter how deep and dark corruption runs, the truth can ultimately emerge. No one should bow before injustice. If I were in the protagonist's shoes having faced such trials, I would continue to stand for truth, not merely by exposing wrongdoing once, but by persistently overseeing the system, championing independent watchdog organizations, and training younger generations to understand their rights. When confronted with the pressure of fighting hidden corruption, I would build strong alliances with journalists, civic groups, and seasoned attorneys to safeguard my rights and those of other innocent people. As for whether racism will be eradicated by 2050, the answer is not so straightforward. If we rely only on a handful of individuals' determination or short-term policies, it will be difficult to expect complete elimination of discriminatory behavior. However, if each person refuses to remain silent about every injustice and continuously demands transparency, then significantly reducing acts of prejudice becomes entirely possible. Looking toward the future, completely eradicating racial hatred will require efforts across generations. But by beginning today, with each of us daring to speak out, the world moves closer to a more just society. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional. All characters and events are creations of the author and are not intended to reference or criticize any real person. It is designed to raise awareness of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating one another with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose all forms of violence, prejudice, and injustice. Please consider this before viewing.